My name is Rachel Lawrence. I am 42 years old, and I live in a suburb of Springfield, Ohio, in a house that I inherited from my grandmother, old but sturdy, with peeling white paint on the shutters and a perpetually creaking front door, as if every time she greets you with a stubborn note. We love this house with all our soul. It smells of cinnamon, old wood, and the coffee I make every morning at 7:30, when the whole house is still napping and only the first rays of the sun creep cautiously over the kitchen curtains. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. My husband, Tom, is a simple and kind man who works in a hardware store nearby. Our son, Zach, is in college. He's smart, diligent, and in every letter he sends from campus, I read Tom's and my efforts. All those evenings without restaurants, without trips, without new shoes, when we saved every cent just to give him the opportunity to escape from a small town and build something bigger. On the very Thursday when everything changed, the day began as usual. I sliced carrots for stew, listening to the faucet drip in the sink and the lazy singing of a starling on a telegraph pole outside the window. It was a surprisingly warm day for April, and the sun splashed across the wooden kitchen floor like someone had poured a bucket of honey. Everything was calm until the phone rang. Tom picked up the phone, and I didn't even turn around. It seemed like it was just one of my colleagues. But when he said, "Mom, slow down, what happened?" I froze with a knife in my hand, and half a carrot rolled across the counter and fell to the floor. He was silent, listening, and I could see his knuckles turning white on the receiver. His face turned gray, like the winter sky. I wiped my hands on a towel and stood next to him. "It was Dad," he whispered, finally sinking onto a stool, as if his legs had stopped supporting him. "Their business, it's everything. They went bankrupt. We lost our house, our car. All." I slowly sat down across from him, feeling a chill run down my spine. The words hung in the air like smoke after a burnt letter. Tom ran his hand over his face, as if he wanted to erase what was happening. "They're asking to stay with us. Not for long. Until they find something." I nodded. The pause between his words and my reaction lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. The words were jarring, but they were predictable. Of course, he couldn't refuse them. Tom was devoted to his family to the end, and I knew there was no choice in this decision, no matter how painful it was. "And what did you tell them?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "That I'll talk to you first. This is your home, Rachel. And I can't force that on you without asking." He was sincere, but I could see in his eyes that he had already made a choice. I thought of Margaret and George. People are bright, noisy, accustomed to luxury, restaurants, outings, salons, and car brand discussions. Our house, simple and quiet, was the opposite of their world. "You know how they are, Tom," I said slowly, choosing my words as if they could change reality. "It's going to be hard for them here. And so do we." "I know," he looked into my eyes, "but they have nowhere else to go." I sighed, stared into the cold pot, and thought about Zach, about our sacrifices, and about the world we'd been creating for years. I could have said no, I could have. But she didn't do it. "Okay," I finally said. "Let them come. But only for a short time. Until they find a place for themselves." Tom put his arm around my shoulders and exhaled heavily, as if he had dropped a stone from his chest. A week has passed. And so on this clear, cold morning day, 2 massive vans pulled into our driveway. I was standing on the porch, in a jumper, with a cup of coffee, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Instead of a couple of suitcases, as expected, furniture, framed paintings, boxes labeled porcelain and electronics began to be pulled out of cars, even the very same almost theatrical grandfather clock that once stood in their lobby in Daytown. That's just the essentials," Margaret said, gracefully climbing the steps. Her lips left a wet trail on my cheek, a kiss as cold and formal as a politician's handshake. You're an angel for letting us invade like this. That's all we took with us. I nodded, unable to speak. My eyes darted to the furniture that was being unloaded on the lawn: leather armchairs, a glass coffee table, statuettes that looked like they came from an expensive boutique. George, beaming like at a reception, was slapping Tom on the back, his voice rising above the noise of the engine. "Oh, Tom, I didn't think I'd be back under your roof again. It will be fun, just like in the old days." He laughed out loud, and there was no embarrassment in that laugh. They behaved as if they were returning from a resort, not after a crash. I looked at Tom, and he caught my eye. It was all there: confusion, regret, anxiety. He came up to me and said softly, "Give us a day. I'll talk to them. Now, just, let's get this over with." I nodded. The day passed in a rush: the clink of dishes, the fuss of movers, and the rearrangement of furniture. By evening, our cozy living room was no longer ours. She became a stranger, filled with things that brought with them a different style, a different world, different roles. I looked at this change and I knew, our lives have changed since today. And in which direction, I still did not understand. The week flew by in a blur. The day Margaret and George set foot on our doorstep with a pile of boxes and complaints, the air in the house seemed to change. The space that was once ours has been filled with new voices, new smells, alien furniture, and alien habits. Everything became somehow cramped, as if the walls had shrunk, yielding to the pressure of new tenants. Our world, fragile and tidy, now lived according to their rhythm, and every morning began with a sense of invasion. On the third day after their arrival, I noticed that Margaret was managing the kitchen as if it belonged to her. She opened the cupboards without knocking, shuffled my spices, as if looking for evidence of my culinary skills there. "Do you still keep condiments in jars without stickers?" She snorted, hovering over the shelf like a queen checking the cellars. I silently collected the dishes, trying not to pay attention. But the first real crack happened in the evening when I was cooking dinner. It was Tuesday, and I decided that spaghetti with homemade tomato sauce, a simple but favorite dish in our family, would be a cozy point in a busy day. The smell of garlic, basil, and boiling sauce was in the air when Margaret entered the kitchen. She stopped in the doorway, lifting her chin as if she were in the school cafeteria. "What's that smell?" Her tone was so hostile that I almost dropped my spoon. I straightened up and turned to her, maintaining a polite smile. "Dinner. Spaghetti with sauce." She came closer, looked over my shoulder into the pot, and grimaced. "Where's the meat? Where's the Parmesan? Fresh herds." She turned to me as if I had offended her taste. "That's how we usually cook." "It's simple and satisfying," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. At that moment, Tom appeared. He was wiping his hands on a dish towel and noticed the tension between us. "Is something wrong?" "What is it?" he asked, his gaze darting from me to his mother. Margaret, crossing her arms, replied with emphasis. "Should we eat this?" She pointed at the pot as if it were boiling dusty cement. "Mom, this is a normal meal." "We can't afford gourmet meals every day," Tom said, trying to keep his voice calm, but his jaw was already clenched. "Well, we're not used to that." George's voice came from the other side of the door. He entered the kitchen, brushing an invisible speck of dust from the cuffs of his shirt. "Maybe you should review the budget. We're not in a tent camp after all." I felt my stomach tighten, as if I were being pushed against a wall. My house, my kitchen, my food, and suddenly everything is criticized, as if I don't try, I don't put my soul into every dish. I swallowed and turned away, stirring the sauce. "We're doing everything we can, George. Our options are limited." "Then maybe we should review them," Margaret said with emphasis. "We are not used to eating like this. We need something more balanced." The next morning, right after breakfast, she handed me a piece of paper folded in half. I unwrapped it, feeling the blood drain from my face. It had a list that even a grocery boutique in downtown Springfield couldn't easily complete: marbled beef, Chilean sea bass, organic truffles, fresh oysters, goat cheese from Vermont, shallots, only fresh basil, extra virgin olive oil. "What's that?" I asked, even though the answer was obvious. "Products." Margaret smiled, as if she were talking about the weather. "We have compiled a list of what we usually eat. I think this will simplify the task." I didn't immediately find what to say. For a moment, I just wanted to throw this sheet in the trash. But I didn't do it. I went over to Tom and showed him the paper, and his eyebrows pulled together. "We can't let that happen," he said. But, as is often the case, conflict is postponed in the name of peace. I went to the store and, gritting my teeth, bought a pack of beef and a box of organic vegetables with the money we had saved to pay the bills. It seemed like a betrayal to myself, but at that moment I just couldn't stand another argument. The days passed. Tom and I ate sandwiches and instant noodles. I sent money to Zach at the canteen so that he wouldn't starve. And in our house, fried scallops with garlic sauce, honey-glazed ribs, salads with rare herbs were served for dinner. Margaret sat at the table, holding a fork like a baton, and discussed the flavors of the dishes with George, while Tom and I chewed cookies at night and washed them down with cheap coffee. They didn't ask how we were doing. They didn't care that we were, in fact, surviving, while they were throwing gastronomic feasts in our kitchen. And the further it went on, the more suffocating the atmosphere in the house became. I no longer woke up with the smell of coffee and did not smile at the morning sun. I would wake up with a heaviness in my chest and the feeling that I had been pushed out of my own life. I was still trying to stay calm, but despair was growing inside me, dull, heavy, like a snowfall from which there was no escape. I knew that if this continued, we would drown. And while I was silently collecting dirty plates every evening, I began to realize that I had become a stranger in my own home. Sometimes the moment doesn't come right away. It accumulates somewhere deep inside, like water in a bowl, which fills patiently for a long time, drop by drop, until one day the last one overflows the edge. That's exactly what happened. Not a scream, not a storm, not a blow, just an evening, dinner, and a clinking spoon in a plate. And I couldn't keep quiet anymore. That evening seemed ordinary, like dozens of previous ones. I was cooking simple pasta with butter and garlic in the kitchen, a familiar dish that Tom and I had eaten in recent weeks. It's been a hard day, and I was hoping that dinner would pass without scenes. But as soon as I entered the dining room, I felt that something was wrong again. Instead of modest plates, there were porcelain dishes on the table, sparkling with expensive sauces, steamed wine glasses, and perfectly fried marble steaks in front of Margaret and George. The smells, spicy and deep, hit the nose, causing not appetite, but bitterness. I sat down across from Tom, putting a plate of pasta in front of me, and felt something tighten in my chest. Margaret laughed, discussing with George what real wine should go with fish, while I, with my eyes downcast, picked at my food with a fork. Tom ate in silence, his gaze intense, as if he was waiting for a blow. And it didn't take long. "Rachel," Margaret began, without looking up from her dish, "would you mind if I ordered some more truffle oil? This sauce with it is simply divine." I put down my fork. Not because she wanted to disagree, but because she just couldn't eat. My chest felt heavy, like before a storm, and the words came out on their own. "This has to stop." Silence descended on the room, as if someone had extinguished all the candles in one motion. Margaret looked up from her steak and looked at me with raised eyebrows. George slowly put down his glass. "Excuse me? What is it?" she asked. "I said it can't go on like this," I repeated. "We can't live like this. You have delicacies. We have pasta out of the box. It's not fair. It's humiliating." George laughed, a short, mirthless laugh. Do you want us to eat this? He pointed at my plate. This stew. It's dinner, I replied, my voice trembling but firm. This is what we can afford. Do you hear what she's saying, Tom? Margaret turned to her son, her voice sharp. Are you going to let her talk to us like that? I turned my head to Tom. His face was frozen, as if between two poles, his wife and his mother. But to my surprise, he made a choice. This is Rachel's house, Mom. His voice was calm, but there was strength in it. And you'll respect her. Margaret flushed. Her lips trembled, and her eyes glittered with anger. I never thought you'd raise your voice against your mother, she hissed. You've always been a good son, Thomas. And now what? Henpecked? George jumped up from his chair as if he had been pulled by a string. Look at you. His finger pointed at Tom like a compass needle. She controls you, and you just sit and listen in silence. How could you change so much? I stood up slowly, looking straight into their eyes. My hands were shaking, but I knew that if I didn't say it now, I would never say it. From today on, no delicacies. No orders, no product lists. We all eat the same thing. And only what our budget can do. Margaret opened her mouth, but no sound came out. George lowered his hand. The air in the room became thick, like before a thunderstorm. I could hear the wall clock ticking, a cat meowing outside the window, and the wind shaking a branch. So that's it, George said, his voice low but infuriated. That's how you want to do business. Good. Let's see how much you can handle. Margaret pushed back her chair, its legs squeaking on the floor. She stood up, keeping her back straight, as if participating in a ballet scene. George followed her, giving me a look of disdain and incomprehension. They left the dining room without saying another word. I stood in the middle of the room, looking at the untouched plates, at the steak slowly cooling in the sauce, and I felt something break inside me, but it wasn't fear or doubt. It was determination. Tom came up to me and gently touched my arm. You did the right thing, he said softly. I nodded, unable to answer. The silence in the house rang as if after hitting a crystal vase that was destined to shatter. We were left alone among the plates, dishes, food, and smells, and even though the house was still full of their belongings, at that moment I felt like I had finally regained a piece of myself. After a loud and painful dinner, when the truth came out loud, I naively thought that maybe relief awaited us. In the end, everything was said. We have marked the boundaries, and now, it would seem, it remains only to accept the new order and follow it. There was silence in the house. But it wasn't the kind of silence that comes after forgiveness. It was the silence on the eve of the storm, thick, tense, with a sense of wariness and expectation. Margaret and George became calm, even overtly polite, but there was a cold aloofness in their gazes. I knew that look, like a man who considers himself insulted and is plotting revenge. 2 days passed, and it seemed that they had started to adopt new roles. They ate at the table with us, albeit in silence, without commenting on the dishes, without pushing the plates away with disdain. I was almost beginning to hope that peace was possible when the doorbell rang in the middle of the day. I wiped my hands on my apron and headed for the door, assuming it might be a neighbor or a courier with some pamphlets. However, there was a man in a black jacket with the logo of an expensive restaurant known in Springfield for its astronomical prices and long queue for reservations. Delivery for Rachel Lawrence, he said, looking at the tablet screen. I froze. I'm sorry, are you sure? I didn't order anything. Yes, madam. The order is placed and paid for online. Your address and name are here. Before I could say anything, Margaret's voice came from behind me, sweet and cloying, like thick honey frozen in a spoon. Ah, I thought we all deserved a good dinner after the recent events. It's just one time, honey. I slowly turned to her, still holding the bag of food, the scent of which floated in the air like a rebuke. Something tightened in my chest. We agreed, I reminded him quietly but clearly. Oh, she shrugged. I thought you were the one who decided to pamper us. I must have made a mistake. Sorry. Tom came into the kitchen at that moment. He heard the last words, and his face showed tension, as if he already knew in advance how it would end. Mom, he said sternly, we have a deal. No orders. It's not just dinner. That's the principle. George appeared in the doorway, arms folded across his chest. It's just food, for God's sake. Will a little normal food kill you? I put my bag on the console by the entrance. Its bottom was warm, and it seemed to me that this heat was burning my hands. It's not about the food, George, I said. It's about respect. We said we couldn't afford it. This is a family decision, not someone's personal whim. What about respect for us? He snapped. I think we're like servants in this house. We walk on tiptoe, we eat some kind of cheap food. And when someone decides to pamper us, you make a scene. We didn't ask anyone to tiptoe, Tom interjected, his voice firmer. We asked you to follow the established rules. All. We didn't eat that dinner that night. The bag of food remained by the door, as a symbol that the rift between us had not disappeared, but was only growing. I thought that would be the end of it. But no, it was just a prologue. The next day, in the evening, I was washing dishes in the kitchen when I heard a dull but ringing thud from the living room, as if something heavy had fallen and shattered. I shuddered, the dishes in my hands shook, and drops of water splashed onto my apron. What the hell? I heard Tom's voice, followed by his quick footsteps. I wiped my hands and hurried after him. In the living room, I saw George standing by a broken vase, the one that belonged to my grandmother. Her porcelain torso lay on the floor in dozens of pieces, among which silvery glaze fragments sparkled. What happened? Tom asked. Oh, I just missed it, George shrugged. An accident. Things happen. He didn't even try to bend down to pick up the pieces. He stood like a statue, with only a slight sneer in his eyes. It was my grandmother's vase, I whispered. She was here long before any of us. Jesus, Rachel, Margaret chuckled, appearing in the doorway. It's just a thing. You'll buy another one, you'll think about it. Something flared up inside me. I took a step forward, barely able to contain my trembling. It's not about the vase. It's about respect. About the fact that you came to someone else's house and did not consider it necessary to at least try to live by our rules. Does anyone show respect to us? George cut me off, his voice sharp as glass. They tolerate us here like uninvited guests. They tell us what to eat, how to speak, even where to sit. And you still demand respect? We're just asking for understanding, Tom said firmly. We didn't leave you on the street. You live here because we wanted to help. Yes, and it feels like it every day, Margaret said. It's like walking through a minefield. And damn it, she was right. Every day turned into a delicate balancing act between patience and explosion. Every morning began with anxiety. What would go wrong today? Who's going to hurt who? What little thing will become a new reason for conflict? I looked at the pieces scattered on the carpet and felt my heart begin to pound harder. I couldn't figure out where I belonged in this house anymore. Where are the limits of my patience? Margaret and George left, leaving us in the living room among the pieces, like two pieces on a chessboard, of a prolonged game. Tom and I silently collected the porcelain, and in every piece that I picked up, I seemed to see a reflection of the cracks that were now passing through our family, our house, and my soul. I've learned a lot in recent weeks. Patience, self-control, the subtle art of suppressing indignation in oneself, hiding it behind a forced smile. Living under the same roof with Margaret and George meant navigating daily between reproaches, hints, and invisible but needle-sharp glances. But nothing prepared me for what happened at that Sunday lunch. It was a clear spring day, as if nature had decided to distract us from family worries for one day. I set the table on the veranda. The fresh air seemed like a safe buffer zone, where words lost their power, dissolving into the scent of blooming lilacs and the sound of birds chirping. Tom and I ate a modest potato salad and fried chicken, again, on a budget. Margaret, as always, brought her own dish, salmon on a pillow of quinoa, drizzled with white wine. I was just about to pour myself some water when, without looking at me, she picked up an olive from the edge of the plate and said, "Tom, I saw a wonderful coat in a boutique last week. Beautiful fabric, perfect cut. I think it's worth buying. It's possible from Zach's Foundation." My hand froze in the air, the glass remained half raised to my lips. I blinked, as if I'd misheard. The air around them thickened, and even the birds seemed to stop for a second. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying not to lose my temper. "Are you suggesting to spend our son's savings on a coat?" Margaret did not look up from her plate. She ate as if nothing had happened. "What's the big deal? He can take out a loan. Everyone is doing it now. And I really need this coat. It will perfectly match the shoes I bought last month." I looked at Tom. He sat rooted to the spot, his eyes narrowed, his face turned to stone. He lowered his fork, slamming it against his plate with unexpected abruptness. "That's out of the question," he said, his voice calm, but with an icy determination. "We've been saving up this money since Zach was born. They are not discussed. They are untouched. And you know it, Mom." Margaret threw up her hands, her face contorted with resentment, and she looked at her son as if he had just betrayed her in the most unthinkable way. "How can you refuse your own mother?" "What is it?" she exclaimed. "It's just a coat." "It's not just a coat," I said. "This is the essence. This is a border that you have no right to cross." Margaret jumped up abruptly. "I've been taking care of you all my life. And now, when I need a little attention, you're denying me the least." "A little attention?" Tom shook his head. "You live in our house, you use our food, water, electricity. We sacrifice our peace for you and the father, and now you're offering to steal from our son for your whim?" "Steal it?" George, who had been eating in silence, shouted. "You call that stealing? We are your family. We are not some kind of strangers. We are entitled to this money no less." "No," I said, getting up. "You don't. This money is for his education. For his future. And you will not destroy it with your selfishness." George's face turned purple, and he pushed back his chair with a bang, standing up to his full height. His voice sounded hoarse, but with feigned calm. "Maybe the local press would be interested to know how you treat your own family. Or, say, Tom's boss. How do you humiliate us, don't give us proper care, and feed us leftovers?" I felt a fire start in my chest. Anxiety mixed with anger. I took a step forward, not hiding my emotions. "Are you threatening us?" "We're just looking for justice," he snapped. "Then look for her somewhere else," I said. "That's it. I can't take it anymore. You two need to find another place to live." "It doesn't work." Margaret blushed, tears rolling down her cheeks, but even they seemed fake. There was no pain in her eyes, just rage. "I can't believe you're doing this to us, Tom," she whispered. "You did it yourself, Mom," he replied, and there was no hesitation in his voice. George started shouting accusations, incoherent, angry, as if he wanted to destroy us with words. But I couldn't hear him anymore. My mind was elsewhere, with my son, with his future, which I protected like a lioness protects a cub. As soon as they stopped talking, I went into the bedroom. My heart was beating fast, and my palms were wet. I sat on the edge of the bed, took out my phone and dialed my grandmother's number. Her voice on the other end was quiet but confident. "Rachel, what's wrong, honey?" I told her everything. The voice was trembling, but the words came one after the other, pouring out like a rushing river after the melting of the snows. I talked about the coat, the foundation, the threats, and how I couldn't take it anymore. Grandma was listening. She didn't interrupt. She only occasionally uttered a short "uh-huh," as if offering a shoulder. "I'll be there," she said at last. "Don't worry. You're not alone. We can handle this." I hung up the phone, buried my face in my hands, and allowed myself to cry for the first time in a long time. But they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of liberation. The decision was made. There was no turning back. I didn't know what to expect when I dialed my grandmother's number. Her voice, warm and calm, always had the magical property of balancing me, as if the universe itself was pausing, listening to her words. She did not ask unnecessary questions, did not express surprise, did not give advice. She only promised to come. 2 days later, order returned to the house. It was neither loud nor sudden, but confident, like the step of an old pendulum. Grandma, Mrs. Grace Howard, arrived with a rolling suitcase and a look that stopped any objections before they even arose. Despite her 78 years, she carried herself with such confidence and grace that even Margaret, who in ordinary life was given everything with great aplomb, took a step back. "I'll stay here on the ground floor," Grandma said, walking into the house and inspecting it like a general returning to an old base after a long absence. "I think a small room by the kitchen will suit me. It's easy to ventilate, and it's closer to coffee." I stepped forward to hug her, and for the first time in months, I felt warmth returning to my heart. Her hands were dry and warm, and the scent of lavender and mint hung over her shoulder. Margaret and George watched her entrance with an expression that could have been mistaken for surprise if it hadn't been for the anxiety evident in their every move. George quickly smoothed his hair, and Margaret bit her lip nervously. Their faces paled as Grandma calmly put down her suitcase and turned around. "I think some things will need to be rearranged to make it comfortable for me. I hope you can help me with this." "Of course," Margaret muttered, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out. "No problem," George added, but his voice sounded uncertain, like that of a student caught in the act of pranks by the headmaster. After her suitcase was placed and the room was put in order, Grandma insisted on a communal lunch. I cooked with her, slowly, almost ceremoniously. She cut vegetables with the precision of a surgeon and said, "You know, Rachel, the kitchen is the heart of the house. Whoever owns the kitchen owns the world. Never forget that." Lunch was surprisingly quiet. Margaret and George behaved with exaggerated politeness, as if they hoped that Grandma would leave as quietly as she arrived. But they didn't know her the way I did. When everyone had gone to their corners, Grandma got up from the table and said loudly and clearly, "Please come into the living room. We're going to have a little family council." I knew that tone. It wasn't a request. It was an order. George looked at Margaret, who pursed her lips and nodded. Tom stood up too, taking my hand. We went into the living room and sat in a semicircle, like at a council of elders. Grandma stood by the fireplace, leaning on her carved cane, more a symbol than a necessity. Her gaze swept over each of us. "I've heard a lot from Rachel. And I'm not happy. This house is in chaos, and I don't like it. It's time to put everything in its place." Margaret frowned and opened her mouth, but Grandma raised her hand, a slight, almost invisible movement, and everything froze. "This house still belongs to me," she continued. "I allowed Rachel and Tom to live here because I knew they would preserve his comfort, traditions, dignity. You," her gaze turned icy, "came here out of need. Not because you were invited with honors, but because you lost everything and needed help. You have been helped. But instead of gratitude, I see only complaints. Margaret began, but her voice faltered. Either rent or help, Grandma interrupted. From now on, you either pay $4,000 a month, which, by today's standards, is more than a modest price for such a house, or you turn out to be useful, cleaning, cooking, helping around the house. You can choose. The silence was thick. Margaret gasped as if she'd been slapped on the cheek. Do you want us to pay the rent? She muttered. That's right, Grandma nodded. You are not at the resort. And not at a party. And if the amount is large, look for other housing. We are a family. George exploded. Is that what they do to a family? The family doesn't exploit each other, Grandma replied calmly. The family respects. Supports it. And it does not require you to live your usual luxurious life at someone else's expense. Margaret turned away, her eyes glittering. George clenched his fists, but said nothing. They both looked like the ground had gone out from under their feet. I'm not going to turn this place into a theater of the absurd, Grandma concluded. You have a night to think. I'm waiting for your reply tomorrow morning. Either you change, or you pack up. She turned to me and Tom. There was so much tenderness in her gaze that I could barely restrain myself from throwing my arms around her neck. And you, children, can finally exhale. I'm here now. It's going to be okay. When Margaret and George retired to their room, probably to discuss limited options, Grandma gently but firmly sat down in an armchair by the window and took out her knitting. And now, she said, bring me some tea. And tell me about Zach's college life. I miss real conversations. For the first time in a long, painful time, I actually exhaled. And with that breath, more than just order returned to the house. His strength returned. Our family is back on its feet. The morning was surprisingly quiet. Light filtered softly through the curtains, warm and amber, like fresh jam. Even the birds outside seemed to be chirping with respect for this fragile harmony. I went downstairs barefoot, stepping on the cool kitchen floor, and felt that the air was filled with something different, new. It was lighter, more transparent. Without the tension, without the thick silence that usually enveloped the house in recent weeks. I stopped at the threshold and froze. There were boxes in the middle of the kitchen. Cardboard, with the edges of the packaging tape sticking out. Some are signed, books, clothes, dishes. George stood next to them, in jeans and a plain shirt, without his former bravado and deliberate importance. His shoulders seemed slumped, like a man who had finally let go of a weight. We're moving out, he said without looking up. We found an apartment. I stood there in silence. Something strange stirred in his chest, not gloating, not even relief, but a shadow of compassion, quickly replaced by tired gratitude. Tom appeared next, walked over to George, nodded. Without further ado, they began to take out the boxes. Not out of politeness, no. It was more of a movement towards liberation, towards the very moment we were waiting for, not even allowing ourselves to believe it. They didn't say goodbye. No long speeches, no dramatic scenes. Just packing, short instructions, slamming doors. Everything was happening at the same speed as things had once filled our house. Only now it's the other way around. They disappeared as if the wind was blowing them away, purifying the air, the walls, and ourselves. Grandma was sitting in her armchair by the window, like a guardian of order and sanity. She didn't interfere, didn't get up, just watched, her knitting needles tapping softly like a clock, counting down the last minutes of their stay here. When the van closed the doors and the engine roared away, silence reigned in the house. Real. Lively. I went into the living room and sat down on the sofa, feeling something that had been living inside for weeks go out of me. Tension, anxiety, fatigue, resentment. It wasn't just saying goodbye to people. It was a farewell to chaos, to the feeling that our house no longer belongs to us. Grandma put down her knitting, looked at me, and bowed her head slightly. Sometimes people need difficulties to realize how far they've come, she said. And how low they have sunk. I nodded. Not as a sign of agreement, but because she knew she was right. Later, we learned from friends that George and Margaret had sold almost all of their former wealth to cover debts and make a deposit for rent. Their new apartment was located in a residential area, on the third floor of a building without an elevator. No antique furniture, no luxurious vases and clocks. Only what is necessary. Only what they could carry. Sometimes I thought about them. Not with anger. Rather, it's with quiet sadness, like remembering a bad dream that hasn't let go for a long time, but now it seems almost alien. Their departure became the point after which the real return to life began. Grandma stayed with us for a couple more weeks. These days were like a rest for the soul. We baked cookies together, watched old movies, she told stories from her youth, and Tom finally started laughing. To really laugh, not the forced smile he used to hide behind. The house was breathing again. He became ours again. Before leaving, Grandma packed her things in her neat suitcase, put on her favorite gray hat with a ribbon, and put on her old shoes, which she wore only on special occasions. We went out to walk her to her car. Before she sat down, she turned to me and put her hand on mine. "You did well, Rachel," she said. "I'm proud of you. Always stand up for yourself. No one will do it for you. This is your home. Your life. And you have the right to protect them." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. She got into the car, and when it drove away, I stood for a long time, peering at the road, until the gray silhouette disappeared around the bend. It's been a few weeks since then. Tom and I go out on the porch every night. We bring cups of tea, sit on wooden chairs, watch as the garden descends into twilight, as the wind rustles in the crowns of an old maple tree. We are silent. But there is a point in this silence. This is the silence of a house where there are no more lies, resentments, and enmity. Where the world lives again. We've been through a storm. It was scary, hard, and sometimes almost unbearable. But we persevered. And now, sitting next to the man I love, in a house that is breathing again, I know that we are stronger than we ever imagined.